Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ninth episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, where tonight's topic will be the first season of the Wheel of Time show. I am Brett. I am going to be your host for the night. And with us, as always, we have Cody.
Hello.
We also have Justin back with us.
Hello, hello.
So, to start off, as I said, we're talking about the Wheel of Time, and just to stress that we're going to be talking about the first season of the show on Amazon Prime. Not specifically talking about the books, though we will, talk about the crossovers here and there and the changes, but really focusing on just the show itself and not too much on the books. So, as usual, I think we'll start off with our each individual histories with the series, and just so we got an idea of where we're coming from.
Brett, you may as well since you're the host.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so Wheel of Time for me has really kind of become a core piece of my entertainment. Started about 7 years ago, which just kind of words come to mind, but Cody actually is the one that introduced me to it, although he didn't know he did it. I was looking for a time at the time. I was looking for some audiobooks to listen to on my car ride, my long commute to work, and I just had happened to remember that Cody and one of our other friends, Chad, in high school, talking about this book series that they were really into, and for some reason that had stuck in my head, and I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna go check this out, and I immediately fell in love with it, and I now have listened to it 3 times in complete. I've watched the show. I follow the news on social media. I'm even wearing my Wheel of Time hoodie tonight.
Dang, scroll. You gotta turn the camera down. Let's see that thing. Wow, that's impressive.
Nice,
I didn't know you had that.
Yeah, my wife got that for me. So
nice.
It's one of my favorites. But even beyond that, about 5 years ago, when I started playing more online games and needed to create my gamer tag, I drew off of Wheel of Time because I literally had just finished listening to it for the first time. And at this point now, basically my entire online presence and the way people know me online is my name is Dragon Reborn in one form or another. On Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, pretty much everywhere except Facebook. So as I said, it really is just it's a core thing in my life that I just really love. And I'm excited to do this here.
Gee, no wonder you wanted to do this episode. Holy cow. He's into this stuff big time. You want to go next, Justin? You want me to go?
I can go.
Okay.
I've had the series, the book series that is recommended to me by a bunch of people over the years. But every time I've sat down and looked at it, it's like 13 books or so. And it seems daunting to get into. I mean, I've read other epic fantasy before, but I've just had never found the time to actually sit down and read The Wheel of Time. So I'm kind of going into, I went into this entirely blind. I knew it was fantasy. I knew it was very highly regarded by a lot of people. I didn't really know much about the setting or the characters or anything. So I entered into watching the show with completely fresh eyes. So I'm curious to see how my impressions of it compare and contrast to the two of you.
Fair.
Yeah, I think it would be really good, as you say, that viewpoint of not knowing the books and just watching the show itself. Because I went through this with my wife when we watched the show, and there's lots of things where I was like, well, that's not the way it happened. That's not what it's supposed to be. But she didn't care that she just enjoyed the show for what it was. So
yeah, right. No, I think that's a good thing that you're here with that perspective, Justin. Okay. Wheel of Time for me is, as Brett said, this was a series I had gotten into, and I don't know if it was like ninth grade, maybe around there, middle school, high school, somewhere right in there. And a confession I have here, which I've never even admitted publicly before, but I had the first 2 books of the series that I had bought at like Kmart or someplace back in the day. And I was like 500 pages into the first book, and I don't know how, but I lost the book. So I never got to read the end of the first book, but I already owned the second book. So here's my confession, Chad, if you ever listen to this, is I repurchased the first book so I could read the ending 100 or 200 pages, and then gave it to Chad as his birthday present. So don't tell him.
Nice.
So I got through that and got through the first 2. No, as has been alluded to here, this is a monstrous series, which we'll talk about here shortly. But I read through the first, I think, 5.5 books and got stuck. And the 6 books, one of the chunkier ones, and dropped the series and came back to it years later and read the first 5.5 books again and got lost in that 6th book again and stopped the series. And it wasn't until, well, actually, it's funny because I think I own maybe all but 1 or 2 of the actual books. But then Brett gave me the audio files, and that was how I finally got through the whole series, was with commuting, just like he said. But the fact that he's gone through it 3 times is insane, because it probably took me like 2.5 years of commuting to get through one listen to this thing. So it's big. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, this is not something that I genuinely ever thought I would see adapted into a film or TV, because a film would never do it justice. And
Agreed.
a TV show, you're like, well, yes, they can do almost anything as a TV show, but like, this is just such a built world with complexities that even for a TV show, I didn't think they would ever be able to try to pull this off, to be honest. So the fact that Amazon put their money behind it and has made a first season that we'll talk about here is it's impressive. I didn't think we'd ever see that. So that's kind of my experience. I also really enjoy it. I don't have a hoodie, but I do enjoy it. But there we go.
So yeah, as you were saying, that it is a very it's a girthy series is the word I would choose to use. I just some scope of the series by numbers. Is 4.4 million words in the 14-book series. The audiobook total time is 451 hours, which if you listen to it nonstop is 18 straight days.
Wow.
And I've listened to that 3 times.
That's crazy.
So, I think this is probably, for me, the most impressive number on this stat sheet I have. It is 2,784 distinct named characters. And
Wow.
beyond that, every single name is unique. There are no names reused that I have ever heard in the series.
Wow.
I don't know if this list if it includes the horses, but pretty much every horse, nearly every horse in the book is named.
Yep.
It really is a series that it wants you to feel like you're part of it and you know everything that's around you in it. And beyond that, so the way it's written is in point of views from different characters. So every part of it is as if you're watching something happen through someone's eyes. There are 147 unique point of views through the series.
Wow.
There's 147 different characters that you're seeing the world through.
I would not have guessed that high. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is.
But to their credit, like, that flows so naturally when you read it.
It does.
Which is amazing. That's wow.
It's very well written. So that kind of just the scope of the series, and it is one of the more important fantasy series out there that I know of. I couldn't say exactly how I haven't looked into how well it stacks up against other things like perhaps Lord of the Rings or any of those other fantasy series like maybe Dune or something, in popularity or like sales or anything.
I have a couple of those because I was looking up numbers too here. So you had mentioned the word count just for listeners for comparisons. So it's just about exactly 4 times as big as the Harry Potter series in terms of words. So if you had how many is Harry Potter? 7 books. So it'd be 28 book Harry Potter series. And Lord of the Rings is only 400, and Lord of the Rings is only 480,000. So it's about 10 Lord of the Rings on top of each other.
Wow.
And in terms of sales, the only one I wrote down was it has sold 90 million copies in the series, which is exactly, interestingly, the same as Game of Thrones currently.
Really?
Game of Thrones had less books and is a newer property, but I mean, that's still, I find it interesting because I always feel like this series is not as widely known as these other properties for X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's the fact that they don't have an adaptation or whatever the case is. It's not old like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but kind of like Brett has said with his love for this, like I feel like the world is that much more richer and interesting than all of those worlds. So
yeah, I agree with that. So I guess we're at a point here now where if we want to leave this up to any questions any of us have about the series or anything we want to just discuss before we get into just kind of breaking down the episodes of the TV series itself. Obviously Justin is new to this, coming blind, and I'm certain I'm certain that from watching the show, you probably had many questions on like the lore, and you're like, wait, what is this about? Because there's a lot of things that they just kind of skim over, unfortunately.
There were a handful of things that we can get to the exact examples when we get to the episodes, but like names that were mentioned once and then never brought up again, like names of things and items and relics, and it's just like, okay, I don't know what that is, but it'll come into play later, I'm sure.
That is an unfortunate side effect of having so much material to try and cram into this show, is that they can't actually focus on the important things as much as they really should.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want me to save my impressions of that like for the end, or if I should just like say it now, but
well, I think maybe, I think my wife probably, I don't want to say complains, but has that same issue with a lot of things we watch too, where like if you have this world that's completely created and not resembling our world in most ways, then like you have this rich mythology of like Brett just said, you can't pause to explain every single term and words, but the problem is that starts to weigh it down for the new person as well, because I was reading a review of the first episode earlier today, and it was like kind of falls into the trap of the beginning of the show, like throws all this stuff at you for 5 minutes, and then it's like, now you're in the world, but like you didn't have time to actually understand what all of that stuff is in those 5 minutes until you actually see it come out and play,
Yeah.
I find it actually one of my favorite parts of the TV series are the origin stories that they produced. They're all animated, like 3 to 4 minute origin stories that are part of the bonus material. They actually go into the lore, and it's the problem is it's still not a really detailed description of the lore, but it does give you more there, and I really like the presentation of those. If you guys happen to check those out.
I did watch a few, and it did offer more, but at the same time, there's a part of me that thinks that, well, if you can't include that in the show proper, the episodes that you produce without an addendum, then you either needed more time or you needed to reformat how you told things. That's kind of how I ended up looking at it after watching a couple of those, where I shouldn't need supplemental material to understand the episodes you're presenting me.
That's fair.
Yeah. Which I understand, again, that's a tall order with how much, it has to be crammed into even the first book, let alone 14 of them. But if they needed more time, they could have done like a 10 episode run or 12 instead of 8. So it just feels like they could have structured that a little better to try and fit more of that in organically. So that's just how that feels to me.
I think one problem I have with so many of these shows being on streaming services now too is like the olden days was a TV show was like half hour or an hour or whatever, 22 and 50 minutes with commercials or whatever it was going to be. Like since they've moved to the streaming format, like all of the companies decide how long the episodes are. And for the most part, it seems like it doesn't matter. Like this one's 52:07, this one's 56:32. So
It is variable, yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
like why couldn't you slow this episode down for 2 minutes and just add more in? And I don't think that's unique to this show. You know, the Marvel shows have that, the other shows, anything that has like a world that they have to build probably could slow down and add in a minute or two.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. You probably could add a lot in just a short amount of time. You don't have to go into like half an episode describing
No.
things, but just a little bit here and a little bit there, you would not add a huge amount to the show. And like you say, it's not a format that they have to squeeze into between other shows on TV.
Right.
It can be
True.
whatever length you want it to be. So,
Yeah.
why not add this bit in there?
Yeah. Yeah, because there were times, and this is getting into kind of my overall thoughts about the structure, but I'll try to be brief. There were times it kind of felt like they were just trying to get from set piece or action scene to the next set piece and action scene without necessarily giving the world a chance to stretch in between. It reminded me of some D&D games I've been a part of where the person running it, they've got all this big world they've spent this time constructing and with its history and everything, but they want to show you as much of it as they can, but they're worried about time. So it's just you go from like town to dungeon to other town to dungeon to the mountain pass or whatever, and it feels like it's getting to these, well, like I said, set pieces without necessarily getting a feel for what is in between. So that's just there were times the show felt like that, where it's just like, hey, look at this big flashy thing that we want to make sure you know about, and it's just there without necessarily feeling like it is a part of the world that they are presenting. I'm sure the books do a better job, but there were times it felt like it was just set piece.
Yeah, I think sorry, I think you're probably right, Justin, because I feel like in the books, well, okay, so this is the difference between the books and the TV show, not in terms of plot, but just in terms of how they're structured. If you think about like the TV show, has to get from this thing to this thing to this thing to this thing, where in the book you have, like Brett said, all of these perspectives and you switch narrators as you're going through. And like by the time you get from Matt and Rand over here from point A and they try to get to point B, in the book you've cut away to 10 different people and heard their story in between that. So by the time you come back to those characters again, you're like, oh, they finally made it to this place. Like it really feels like it has been a really, really long time,
Yeah.
And in the TV show, they don't really cut away or show perspective like that because it's all, outside third person, I guess. But I was, sorry, I was one more thing here. I was just mentioning earlier, I was reading some things and another couple people had perspective on this too, where they said essentially this is a quest show. And by the nature of a quest show, like one of the biggest criticisms they get with like a Game of Thrones or anything is like some series have like this tendency to be like, and we're walking and we're walking and we're walking. And you're like, just get to the damn place already. But maybe Justin, you're saying like they didn't spend enough time walking and slowing down and explaining stuff. They did just jump too quick.
Kind of, yeah. And again, it kind of goes back to the idea that if they had made the episodes a bit more uniform or stretched them out a bit to, fit in a few extra minutes here or there, I think that would have helped. But at the same time, I do understand this is, it's an investment. I'm sure Amazon spent a lot of money on, getting the licensing and then, the actual production. So they want to make sure they get, enough out there to interest the average viewer, to keep them engaged without bogging it down or whatever with exposition. So it's a tightrope. I understand that, but it did feel a little bit like load up the next level kind of thing, and then the next series of big events happens without the little stuff in between. So sometimes, not all the time, but
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say was so much of the book is written inner monologue. It's people thinking about things
Oh,
and not saying those things, and things not actually happening. It's just it's thoughts and things like that.
Good point.
Like there's parts in the book where in real time, like the events happening probably take like 5 seconds, but to read that passage probably takes like 5 minutes. Because it's this person is like thinking about this situation, and oh my god, I gotta do this, I gotta cast this, and yeah, it is very descriptive for sure, and that's
okay.
something that you can't get that across in a show without literally pausing the image and having a voiceover.
Yeah, that's a good
So you're
point.
wondering how we got here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's only ever done for like comedic effect in shows and movies.
Yeah,
Let us tell
that's
you.
fair.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
All right. Well, so we I guess if we're don't have any other questions, we can go into just kind of brief. I was thinking brief synopsis of each episode, just hitting some of the key moments, and just seeing where the discussion goes from there.
Good.
So, all right. So, episode 1, titled "Leave Taking," which
Menace. Oh no.
which basically gives us, as first episodes tend to do, gives us our introductions to the world, its history, the characters, and this one also includes a large, very visually attractive battle, and then the aftermath of that battle. So we start with the opening scene is Moiraine kind of putting on her business pants and telling us about her mission, and kind of really sets up the core of what the show is about. Then we have a scene that with the Red Aes Sedai chasing down a male channeler, gelling him. We get scenes with in the Winespring Inn showing all our main characters, Rand, Mat, Perrin, Egwene, and all the relationships between these young people and their friendships. Also get the relationships between Rand and Egwene, kind of on again, off again. Then there's the big battle with the Trolloc attack. We get to see how powerful Moiraine is. And then there's the aftermath where we actually learn a bit more about the prophecy of the dragon. And then the group leaves the Two Rivers, which is a bit of a pet peeve of mine that they I'll just go ahead and say that right now. They do not say the actual name of the village in the show, and I do not understand why. The village is called Emond's Field. That's where they live, and it's in a province called the Two Rivers. But in the show, they only say the Two Rivers. They never say Emond's Field anywhere. And it's one of those things that I kind of look at it and I'm like, why? Just say the name. Well, why not include that? But just a little pet peeve of mine that I just throw in there. But so anyways, what do you guys have for thoughts on this episode?
Well, the first thing that struck me was how female centric the world is, and not in a bad way. It was striking. The fact that it stood out to me so much, it illustrates just how much the fantasy genre is generally skewed the other way in most other series and books. Seeing the women being in the positions of magical power. I mean, and even in the tavern, like when there's people, just drinking and carousing and whatnot, the women are just as raucous as the men. And just seeing that portrayed, it was a fresh take on things. I thought that was a really interesting change of pace. And
don't you remember all the strong female characters in Lord of the Rings?
Case in point. And yeah, seeing that flip front and center, I that immediately had my interest, because it's like, okay, even if the town itself kind of looks like your generic fantasy village, you can tell the world has more to it than that. And it was enough to immediately get my attention and see where this was going. So yeah, I thought it had a good start, certainly. I don't know how it compares to the start of the first book, but it was enough to certainly catch my interest as someone who had no exposure to it whatsoever.
Yeah, I tried to rewatch all of these this week and did not get through all of them. I got through about half of them, but this opening episode I thought was pretty successful in terms of like just kind of showing what the main core character's life was like back at the village, and particularly that battle scene with the Trollocs, where I think maybe Brett already mentioned once, but like in the books, I think you and I have had this conversation before, but in the books, like the one power is like this nebulous thing that's like, how does it work? And in this, I think you made the reference of like, you see like the weaves of,
it looks like a physical object that you could reach out and hold on to in the show, which is an interesting take on it. Yeah.
It's got a little visual, I guess you have to for the show, because it can't just be like, whoa, you know, and
yeah,
they're like, what did that person just do that's invisible? We can't tell.
Right. So just a point of reference for Justin, anybody else listening who hasn't read the books, is that channelers who are using the one power, they can see each other using it, but people who can't use the power cannot see the weaves.
Oh,
but obviously for a show that does not work very well if you cannot see what's going on. So I understand why they made that choice to kind of make it a very visible, almost physical thing. But just for point of reference, yeah, you should be able to see the weaves generally.
I think there's a lot in this first episode too. You know, though I'll say this as well as just kind of a reference point, I suppose the TV show has ramped up the adultness, I think, of the plot slightly versus the books.
Yes.
We, you know, having gone through the books, we originally had tried the first episode with our kids, and we got to like 10 minutes into this episode when like Maureen is in a hot tub and Lan comes and joins her taking off his clothes, and like they only show his butt, but I was like, oh boy. And Karen's like, that's the end of this show, and I was like, yeah, kids aren't going to watch this with us. But it's interesting, like another article I was reading today actually even mentioned, Justin, the thing you said about the females kind of have more of a central role in the plot, and then also a different one I was reading was really praising that particular scene because they were like, in the fantasy genre, especially probably in like a post Game of Thrones world, you kind of expect like those two characters are going to get it on when they're in the hot tub, you know, and it's purely like they just lounge naked in the hot tub and enjoy each other's company. And there's like no romance, there's no affection. It's just normal.
Yeah. I did think that was a really good way of illustrating what the relationship is. It's strictly business. He's there as her warder, her bodyguard, and there isn't any romantic involvement. And I thought that was pretty refreshing. The fact that people can be professional and take their jobs seriously and not have that sort of thing, you know, by necessity creep in. So.
Yeah, one thing I do wish they and you know, again, that this thing is going to be permeating the entire show, is that there just isn't enough time to really, you know, flesh things out as much as should be, you know, really, you know, would be worth it doing.
No, they had enough time to flesh things out in that scene.
It could be warmer.
You know, I mean, like I would have really liked to see more interaction between Rand and Matt and Perrin, because they've all grown up together. Their entire lives they spent all the time together, and they're all, you know, best friends. And we do get some of that. You know, we see the camaraderie and how they've got each other's backs. Like, you know, they Rand and Perrin, you know, collect some money to give to Matt so he can buy these lanterns for his sisters. And you know, and you can see he's, you know, he doesn't want to do it, but he's really grateful for that. You know, so we get little things like that. But a lot of the episode is just flash scene to scene and not being able to really focus on things a lot.
Yeah. With regards to the main four characters from the town, I did get the impression, they knew each other, but it wasn't until later that I realized how close of friends they were, because like you said, the story didn't have a chance to develop that right off the bat. So when I realized, you know, later on that, they aren't just acquaintances, that, you know, they are all and have been friends for most of their lives, it's like, oh, okay, it would have been nice to have seen a bit more of that early on, like you said. I agree.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I'm going to do a lot of deferring to Brett here, who knows the series better than I, but they do make some small character tweaks here in this first episode already, right? With
They do. Yeah.
I just mentioned the Moraine and land scene, but and this could be me as the reader, I guess, in particular, but I always thought there was at least a little tension between the two of them for plot points that come up later with just regarding, what their relationship actually is and what happens to them ultimately in this plot. And then the other person was obviously Perrin, who had quite a change here from the books.
Right.
So
yeah, and that was one of the things where I understand. I think I understand why they made that change, because it ends up being a point where Perrin now, for the rest of the series, or at least for foreseeable future, is very kind of subdued, and he's in this grief over what happened, and that it isn't necessarily grief in the books, but he is he's like a gentle giant in the books, and the way of kind of getting that point across in the show is for him to accidentally kill his wife. So now he's like, man, I gotta be careful with everything I do from here on out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And he actually is not married in the books at all.
Yeah, so spoiler for Justin and listeners, for a 32-year-old book, he's not married in the books. So
that is a weird change.
When that started in the first episode and they showed his wife, I was like, wait, what?
I had the same reaction. Yeah.
That's going to change a lot in this overall story. But
and then she was gone. So it didn't really change much of anything.
And then he killed her. So
another little change that so Matt is he's kind of a scoundrel. He is but it never really describes them as being like poor or being like a broken family. And so to portray that in the show was a little off-putting for me, because I never got a sense in the books of his father being someone who could not be respected. He seemed like a respectable person, a person who has some fun from time to time, but isn't like the person who's going around cheating on his wife right in front of her.
Yeah, I was almost under the impression that wasn't his actual father, like something had happened and she had remarried or something, because just from how distant the two of them were.
That would be fair.
Yeah.
But I could see, in hindsight, I could see why they, I think, made that changes is to, they really kind of put this this darkness on Matt that kind of allows them to expand on some other things later. So they give him this backstory that his life is not easy, that he's really struggling to get by, and I guess I can see why they did it, but at the same time it comes back to the same thing, right? Like why make the changes? I wish I could be like in the room with them and be like, okay, can you explain why you did this?
What's the reason for this?
Yeah. But it's just small changes like that with characters. But
I'm gonna mess this up at some point here, and this is again where we're gonna go to Brett. So in the TV show, Moraine comes to Emmons Field, the Two Rivers, to look for the dragon, essentially. And another term we're throwing out here is ta'veren, right? Like these are all people that are tied to we should probably mention that too. There's like this general, they kind of refer to it almost as like a tapestry, like the stitching of the world. That's like the story of everything that's all tied together somehow. And these particular kids, or whatever you want to call them here, have like more pull to them, I guess, of like the people around them, and like how the story of the world and history kind of influences
characters
itself.
who can change the fate of other people around them.
Okay, there we go. But in the book, does she come to the town? I guess this might be getting episodes ahead here, but where in the book series does she recognize who the Dragon Reborn is? If you remember that, even, I don't know.
I would say it in the books, it's actually fairly similar to the show. It's
okay.
Near the end of the book. I think she definitely has a better idea, but doesn't have confirmation until near the end of the
Okay.
first book.
Yeah, because it had been so long when I was watching this as someone who had, read or listened to the books. I was like, probably in my head, because I'm like, well, here's how this is going to play out. But I'm like, she's trying to figure out like who it is. And I like the little twist that they had in the TV show, which is like, it could be a female, it could be a male. Like, you don't know who it necessarily is. I guess she rules out Nynaeve because she was too old. Is that
Too old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
too
Right.
old at the time. Which
So in the books, it was what was it strictly the dragon is a guy or
Yes.
oh
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
oh,
There's
that's what it
never-
was. But she didn't know which of the three it was, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's right.
Because Rand and Matt and Perrin were all born within a couple weeks of each other. And the another thing that they don't really explain is that the prophecy of the dragon says that the person who was reborn as a dragon was born on this date, or like a very specific time frame. And so she's looking for people of a very specific age, and
Okay.
finds these three boys who are all very similar.
I'm trying to think of anything else from the first episode here. I think your notes on Perrin and Matt are probably spot on. I felt like maybe Rand was the one I got to know the least in this first episode. I don't know if that was by design or not necessarily. We see a little bit of like this relationship with Egwene, but he kind of comes off as bland, to be honest, in this first episode.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say that's kind of Rand's personality in the books too. He's the most well, maybe not quiet. I guess a Perrin is probably more quiet than Rand in the books. Perrin is more reserved, but Rand also isn't boisterous. He's just kind of like doing
That's
his
true.
duty. He's the very dutiful
Salt
son.
of the earth kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I do think they cast Nynaeve pretty well in this, though. Like her temperament
yep.
seemed to be pretty.
She did a
much
very good
like
job. Yeah.
the fiery person I expected from the book.
Very abrasive.
Yes.
Not sure if you like her or not. You can't
Yeah.
really tell.
Kind of like I always respect her, but don't necessarily like her.
Right. Yep.
So that was really good. Last note I had on just this first one here, I guess, is just I actually have two last ones. So the Trollocs, just to mention them quickly, what did you think of how they were portrayed in the show? Like look wise or characteristic wise?
I feel like in general they looked a bit too much like Bigfoot. they're
Man,
very,
pig.
they're all very hairy from toe to neck, and there really isn't there isn't a lot of differentiation between them. Like I say, from toe to neck, from head up, there is a fair amount of difference, and that is reflected in the books where the Trollocs have features of like several different animal types. There's boar, birds, there's like deer and bears, and
Yeah.
they all have these unique animal features to them, which I think that part was portrayed well, and the costumes looked really good. The parts that were I guess I don't know how much. I think most of it was probably actual costumes.
Yeah, I did hear that it was mostly practical effects they did.
Yeah, I think
good.
They limited the CGI in that, which looked really well. It looked good in the series.
Yeah, because some of the CGI we see later is
there are a few.
questionable.
Yeah, there are.
There
a
was
few
there was
questionable
one or
bits.
two shots of the Trollocs that I was like, that looks like a guy in a costume walking around, but I suppose there's only so many ways you can like walk with a costume on without.
no, Cody. That is 100% authentic Trolloc footage.
It's the Patterson Trolloc film. Oh, and then my last note for episode 1 here, I was gonna go back to something Justin had said. So I know the number on this. They spent $80 million on this first season, which was the most of any
Wow.
TV show season ever.
Wow.
Per episode. It was 10 million per episode, which broke the record, I think, of Game of Thrones. And
crap.
this was the record until Amazon's new Lord of the Rings series, which comes up very soon. They've already broken it. So that is why all you listeners, your Amazon Prime accounts are going up, just so you're clear on it.
just so we are these fans can have our 10 minutes of pleasure
right.
with the show.
Your free shipping now costs longer, so my childhood dreams could be on film.
Exactly.
Oh.
So I think really the standout point of this first episode is the battle with the Trollocs, and when we finally, well, it's not the first time we see the power, because we see the power used by the Reds when they gentle that the guy in the start of the show, but the battle weaves going on here I really enjoyed that. I think everything looked really well, that you really get like I really got a sense like a goosebumps kind of feel, like just seeing all this and be like, wow, that's amazing to see.
Yeah. It would have been nice to have some concept of, you know, what limitations the one power has, like, because in my notes here I've got Moraine did everything from like channeling fire to lightning to telekinesis to like she disintegrates or like cuts a guy in half and he just kind of like melts at one point. She heals someone. It's like, okay, what's the framework for how this magic works? What can't it do? And it just kind of felt like, at least in this fight, it was spectacular to look at, but I had no idea, you know, what her limits were, if she had any. So it would have been kind of nice to, it's somewhere down the line, get an idea for that. And I'm not sure we really do in this first season.
Yeah, they really don't explain that to any degree.
Okay.
There's so like the power is broken down in like 5 kind of sections. There's like fire, air, water, earth, spirit.
You know where this is going.
Okay.
Planet. Yes, one more week.
So, you know, in reality, by using those different components, like, yeah, everything you saw is a legit thing that's in the books. And beyond that, you know, it's pretty limitless. I would say, like, just about anything can and does happen. So
yeah, I would say in the books too, like the different Aes Sedai or other characters you meet, like there are certainly like I don't want to call them spells, but essentially like that one has discovered by like using this much air and this much fire and this combination makes this happen, and like that's not commonly known to everybody else. Like it's something they have found or like rediscovered or whatever.
True. Yeah. So after the battle here, we have the aftermath, and we finally learned Moraine kind of springs this on him, like the prophecy of the dragon that says, you know, like, one of you is this mythical person come back to life, and these creatures are coming to get you, so you need to leave. And it was done a bit more convincingly in the books, but again, time frame. So she's just like, we got to go now, and they just say, okay, let's go.
Well, to be fair, there was like a bigger force of Trollocs approaching from the distance, so that kind of, you know, nudged them out the door.
Yeah,
that's true.
So one thing I really enjoyed was the last line of this episode is the way they started every single book in the series.
Yes.
So that was a really nice touch, and there was through the series, there's lots of those little things that they inject into, where fans of the books are like, this is something I've heard so many times. I love seeing this in here. And but yeah, that the way it finishes with, you know, there is no beginnings or endings to turning the wheel, but it was a beginning. That's literally the first line of like every single book. And so they finished the show with that, and it really stuck the landing for me there.
Yeah, I agree. Just has like Brett just said, like those memorable passages. And I know like our friend Chad and some other people I've seen that have finished this book series as well. Like you'll see a social media post when it's over, and they'll inevitably have like some line in there about like the wheel keeping on turning and beginnings and endings and the wind blowing and the ages and all these things. So yeah, it is impactful. I think it sticks with you if you've experienced these in the book form. Should we mention too, in this first episode, also Rand's dad is attacked by the Trollocs. I mean, that might be another point to get in here. Tam, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point, because that certainly plays a big part later. Is, you know, when the Trollocs start attacking, this is kind of this coordinated assault. So they're hitting the village, they're hitting outlying farms, which is where Rand and his father Tam currently are. The Trolloc comes in, they're fighting them off, and a really cool, another one of these kind of like Easter egg of sorts kind of things in this show is Tam pulls out this sword, which Rand had no idea that he even owned. And it's got a heron mark on the side, which they very clearly point that out, visually. They're like, this has a mark on it. So it has meaning. And then we see, Tam going to work on this Trolloc, and Rand's like, you can use the sword? What? Yeah, so the Trolloc eventually gets a hit on on Tam. He's got injury on the shoulder, and the Trolloc poison is seeping into him and slowly killing him, even though it wasn't a life-threatening injury, so to speak. And so he's got this poison in him that's making him sick, and that certainly plays a big part later on.
Yeah, even if it hadn't been for the heron mark, being focused on so strongly, that's an awfully nice sword for just a farmer to be having on hand. So that alone was nice storytelling without really, leading too much on look at what we got here. It was organic. I like that.
It's funny too, because I'm like the concept of like your elder relative having this swords in secret from the family all these years is like how like every RPG starts that you play. And I'm like, well, they're just stealing it from that. And then I remember like the book was written like before all of those came out for the most part. So it's like, they stole it from this. Never mind.
All right. Well, I think that that pretty well sums up the first episode. So I guess we'll move on to 2. Episode 2, titled Shadows Waiting. So definitely a much slower paced episode where we actually get to see some more interaction between these characters. And even just like my notes on the episode is like half of what the first episode was. So it's just there's less things going on, which is kind of nice after that first kind of breakneck episode. But some of the key points we meet the White Cloaks, and we see the brutality that they have. We get an actual opening credits, which I really love the opening credits to this show. It's a really clever way to to do this. And then we get a lot of the group wondering about Moiraine's motives and can they actually trust her. Another really big thing that I'm glad they worked in is the songs and stories of Manetheren, because in the books, songs are really important. There's always mention of a song. Like characters will walk into a tavern and they'll be like, oh, this person is playing this song. It has a name, and has a tune, and
always has like 4 different names depending on the land you're in.
Exactly. Yep. I know this is this name here. But I thought that was a really, really cool thing that they had that song in there.
Yeah, I actually even put a note about that because that made this world feel like it had a lot of history to it, and it was just such a small thing, and it conveyed so much, even to an outsider like me.
Yeah. So the characters, they eventually have to run for safety, and they go into Shadar Logoth, which ends up being a terrible idea, because Mat is drawn to and finds this dagger, which is it's a very different scene in the books, but we just skip over that more or less. But he finds this dagger, which ends up being incredibly important later on as well. And then in their flight from this danger in the city, they're split into 3 groups, and they all kind of are forced to go off their separate ways for the moment. And right at the very end, we find out that Nynaeve is actually alive, which probably wasn't a huge shock for most people, but but it was a cool little ending to that episode.
Yeah. So, Justin, you want to go first on this? Anything you want to say here?
Let's see. Well, we did skip over one part where they're taking a ferry across this this river, and because Trollocs can't cross large bodies of water or whatever.
They can't swim. That's their only weakness.
Yeah. One gets like knocked in and he's like floundering and goes under. But when they get to the other side, before the Trollocs catch up to the shore, the ferryman's like, well, I have to go back for my son. He's going to be arriving any time now. I can't just leave him to the teeming hordes. And they have to make a really kind of, well, what seems like it should be a very difficult decision, saying, no, we can't let you do that because you'll doom us all, pretty much. And it was hard to sit through, because I mean, ostensibly these are the good guys, but it kind of paints the world as one where even the good guys have to make bad decisions sometimes. And I thought that really kind of set the tone, where it's like, okay, this isn't going to be, it's not going to be a walk in the park. There's going to have to be sacrifices that'll have to be made as this quest goes on. And it was a throwaway character, a smaller scene, but I think it was important. So I just wanted to make sure we talked about that a little.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a big point, that the mission that they're on is far more important than the life of one man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that gets into all sorts of questions about morality, and is the life of one worth throwing away for the lives of many? And yeah, I like when stories deal with themes like that.
Yeah, it does give them an outlet also for the characters to be like, is Moraine actually helping us, or is she the bad guy?
Yeah. So yeah, those shades of gray are it makes the characters in the world feel believable. I liked that. Let's see. They're the only other. I mean, there's smaller things I have here. I did like that we got our first glimpses of what might be these characters. The main four's powers, at least a couple of them. Like wolves attack at one point, and Perrin runs into wolves at one point, and they don't attack him. And like one comes up and like licks his hand where he's injured, and I kind of tilted my head at that, knowing that all four of these are potential, the reincarnations of the dragon. I started to wonder, do they have like different power sets? Is this like what Perrin can do? And later on, we find out whether or not that's the case. But I thought it was a nice easing into that idea that each of our four main heroes does have something special about them beyond just being born at the right time. So
agreed. That was really well done.
Yeah. But yeah, I in general, I liked that this was a little bit of a slower paced episode, because it did allow for moments like that. It did allow for that, the song that they were singing that you mentioned. It allowed for the world to kind of build itself a bit before we jumped right into the next major set piece, which we do at the end with Shatter Logoth. But even that was pretty cool. I thought that had lore to it. It had history.
Yep.
It was in really good shape for being abandoned for who knows how many years.
True.
But yeah, I enjoyed this episode too.
Yeah, I think this, again, like, it's a slower paced episode, but it is not just going back and adding to the stuff from the first episode. Like, they are still adding new stuff on in this second one, which is important too. So you get the White Cloaks, which Brett mentioned to start off with there with Valda, and you kind of see like, the Aes Sedai, when they first entered the tavern in the first episode, kind of have like this kind of mixed reputation, I guess, with different parts of the world, different people, what their beliefs are and who they follow and things of that nature, where for the most part, they're probably seen as, the upholders of goodness in the world, but there's definitely large pockets of the world that's not the case for, that they are, the evil sign, or they're just against them, and the White Cloaks fall into that second category. So it's good to see them introduced. And then some of the powers I've already mentioned here as well. And then the Shatter Logoth, I really liked that scene. I was so excited when they got to that particular place, because I just love the idea, the concept of like a cursed city that, they go to stay the night in. Like, hey, where should we go? Cursed city sounds good. Let's do it.
Try the veal.
I was really curious how they were going to work the, like, I don't know what the official term is, like the shadow of the city, I guess, the like spirit.
Mashadar.
There you go. Okay.
It doesn't have a name in the show, but it has a name in the books.
Okay. So, and I thought they did a pretty decent job of that, of just like showing it like move around the city and kind of touch things and basically turn them to dust. And it was an interesting concept that like they could escape it if they could stay in the light, literally, and just try to like run through a doorway and hope to hell there were stairs that they could like escape it to get to the next little part. and the history and stuff. I thought that was all really well done. I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think in the first episode we saw a fade either, did we?
I think we did.
Was there one in
Yeah.
the first episode? Okay.
You see,
Yeah, it was leading the Trollocs, wasn't it?
Yeah, you don't get I don't think you get a close up of it in the first episode.
Okay.
Like we do in the second one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But
So that was,
that is a terrible a terrible face to come into contact with.
oh yeah. It's like a mouth of a penguin. That thing was terrifying. Oh my gosh. And it's tough too, like the fantasy genre, and we mentioned some of these other series already, but like now that they have to take this off the page and put it into visuals, you know, I see like the fade and I'm like, that's awesome, but like, is it that different than like, I don't know, like a Death Eater from Harry Potter, or like you know, certain things from Lord of the Rings, or you know, like there's these, you can only make a bad guy look so many different ways before you're like, oh, this kind of reminds me of a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah, they are a bit and that's actually, I suppose it's fair to bring up now, is that Robert Jordan, in creating this world, really drew upon Lord of the Rings, because that was something that was a predecessor to him, that people, it was already established that people knew and enjoyed. And when he wrote the first book, it was still like this high fantasy was still not like a popular book subject. You know, it wasn't like everybody's running out of the store to buy high fantasy books. So he really drew a lot on Lord of the Rings. And so I think that's certainly, the fades definitely have a bit of a feel of the wraiths from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Nazgul. Yeah.
Yep.
My main issue with them initially was the terminology, because I swear the first time they're mentioned, it's like when Moraine and Lan are coming into Two Rivers. She says something at one point, something like, there may already be an eyeless here, and then
Yeah.
later on they just keep calling them fades. I'm like, is a fade the same thing as an eyeless? I mean, this thing clearly doesn't have eyes, but is this a fade? And so for a little while I was a bit confused about that, and but eventually it
fair.
kind of all clicked. But so yeah, there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around that's not entirely clear at first. So
I think those are in the book. Aren't those both slang too? Because aren't they actually called Murdrol in the books?
Yes, that's true.
So,
Okay.
the technical name of them is a Murdrol,
so
and
Okay.
Fade and Eyeless are both slang terms. Exactly.
okay.
one minor quibble I had about this one was kind of, as we watched this episode together, was, so they're in this city. As Brett mentioned, they kind of split up, Lan and Moraine and Matt and Rand and Perrin and Egwene in these like three pairs, and they all escape the city. Yay. And I'm like they show the city is huge, but like, how big was this city that when they all escaped, they were like, hey, we should walk around the edge of this city to see if anybody else made it out. But
Right.
instead they're like in three vastly different looking environments. Like we'll
That's
see
fair.
later, like Rand and Matt are like on the White Cliffs of Dover walking, and like it's
Yeah.
like, okay, how big was the city?
And that is a
Yeah.
good point, because at some point seeing a map of the world would have been helpful.
Mm.
And maybe at some point in the opening credits there was one. I just, for the sake of time, I skipped the credits. I know you really like them, Brett, but it's
Yeah, there's no map anywhere that
Okay.
I remember.
it would have helped, because yeah, it was a little jarring seeing how different the areas they ended up in were after
there is a
they
fa-
got out of the city.
There's a very nice interactive map. If you have the Amazon Prime app,
Mhm.
There's actually a whole bunch of nice information on the app,
Okay,
which is not in the show, unfortunately. But
gotcha.
but yeah, if you are interested in learning more about that, there's a nice map there.
Okay,
I mean, that's
I'm
good to
sure I'll
know,
read the books at
because
some point. But
I would be worried about, I was gonna say I'd be worried about like looking at a website, because that probably would be spoilers for the rest of the series. So
yeah,
if you had the book though, I think the book just has it in the inside cover, and it's not like they don't mark, what's what and where's where. It's just like, here's the world. So that's pretty safe.
okay.
Yeah.
Which you are right, because it's a fantasy book, and like, whenever I pick up a fantasy book, I always like to look at the map and be like, ooh, they're gonna get to
Same.
that place eventually over there.
Mhm. Yeah, and the lack of that, I mean, it didn't ruin things for me, but it did leave me a little lost at sea at times.
Yeah, I could see that.
All right. Well, let's see. I have any notes here on that one. And we do get some, a really nice, just short scene with Matt and Perrin, and the dagger that Layla had made for Matt. That was nice to see that, the interaction between these two friends. And yeah, the encounter with the wolves was really cool. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, I think that pretty much that's all my notes on this episode.
Yeah, you guys already covered it, but I did enjoy that scene quite a bit at Terran's Ferry with the the guy like swimming out to get to the raft and it going down and the whole tense scene there. But I kind of like Justin said, like it showed that it wasn't going to be easy, but also kind of showed that there's maybe reasons why some parts of the world, maybe such as the White Cloaks, like don't think the Aes Sedai are a force of entire good, because decisions like this have to be made sometimes or whatever.
Yeah, it's probably, I guess we could point that out too. So I mean, I would think anybody who's watching this kind of fresh, probably gets this feeling about the White Cloaks, but they're very they're almost like a religious, zealous military group. And essentially they have their own codes and morals, and they're like, we're going to enforce this. We don't care if if this is right to us, and we're just going to enforce this. You guys, just you have to deal with it. But yeah, that they can be they're definitely very brutal in the books, and that comes across really well in the show as well.
Yeah, and they also, like the typical fantasy story has, like like we just mentioned, the map that's all divvied up into kingdoms, of course, and same thing here. And in the book series, most of those kingdoms have their own army associated with the country, but then the White Cloaks kind of operate independently, where they just like go across the map and kind of do whatever the hell they want because they think they can. And they're not the only group that kind of travels across boundaries either. So in the White Cloak, I don't know if this is I'm trying to look at the notes here. When do the White Cloaks meet them on their way? Is that the next episode?
It
4, 3?
It's
I'm just not seeing that part, but I guess I'll just say for this second here, like well, it's coming up, but essentially, like
it is in this episode.
It is in this episode. Okay, it's not in my summary here, but even like a group like the White Cloaks, like they make just enough of a mention to say, like, even that is not like a homogenous group of people. Like there are layers of hierarchy and different professions within just that one group. So it's the world just completely, the detail here again is just ridiculous.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, I suppose we'll move on to episode 3 here. Okay. So episode 3, titled "A Place of Safety," which is I find as an ironic title, because essentially we're finding out that there really is no place safe in this world currently. So starts off with a flashback to how Nynaeve fought off this Trolloc and escaped. We get to see some interactions between Lan and Nynaeve, where he's really kind of impressed with first being able to track him and her the word is failing me, but how she's like not afraid of him. Then everybody's just kind of in their own groups. They're all are decided that they have to go towards the White Tower. That was their original idea. Let's head towards the White Tower. So they're all kind of moving in the same direction. Rand and Matt get to Breen Spring, which is actually a new location.
Yeah.
Instead of using one of the existing locations in the book, they're like, let's make a whole new village.
One of the 10,000 cities.
Yeah, exactly. But this is where we get to meet sad old rocker Tom and his guitar, which is exactly how I wrote it down here. It's kind of a cool take on the character. I didn't dislike it. I hope that in the future we get more of the storytelling Tom, because we don't, he's a Gleeman in this world is he's a storyteller, he's a performer, he's like a one-man show, he's telling about history and myths,
Mhm.
and he often does these in a very like a high chant type form of speaking, a very regal form of speaking. And this version of Tom, and I can see where they're going with this, because they wanted this to be a Tom who is very very sad and depressed because of what had happened to his nephew recently, rather than where in the books that happened farther back, and he's kind of beyond it for the most part. That they want him to be kind of this depressed character, because that it actually helps him when he makes this decision to help the boys. It's because of that sadness. But anyways, Tom is a cool character. I'm glad they didn't cut him out, because he actually is in the books right from the very beginning. and here we don't meet him until halfway through the season. But then we get a bit of see Matt changing. He's getting more irritable. There's you can see there's something off with Matt there. And then they're trying to earn some coin to have a place to sleep in this town, and the person who they think is helping them is actually one of the bad guys. It's a dark friend, and she tries to kill him, and but they end up escaping. And at the end, let's see here, episode ends with Lan and Moraine and Nynaeve finding an Aes Sedai camp where they can get Moraine healed from this injury she has. And then we get to see our first look at Logain, which is another great character.
Yeah.
So
what was
go on.
What did you say was the name of the town they made?
Green Spring.
Yeah, it looked like a green spring. All right. That had to be like an ironic name, right? Had to be. Do you want to go, Justin? Want me to go? I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot and make you go first every time, but
no, I was going to. I just didn't want to talk over one of you.
Sure.
So did you mention the Tinkers? Because I think they show up in this episode.
They do. Yes, I did not mention them, but yes, that is episode. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, I liked seeing like the various places our heroes end up, just because they are also different from one another. Regarding Green Spring, I'm glad the bartender that they thought was helping them, but that ended up being the dark friend, I'm glad that she actually was using them, because initially it seemed like, oh, they're trying to shoehorn in like another romance here or something like that, where oh, you're so useful at chopping wood and blah blah blah.
Your muscles.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like it was just leaning into that. It's just like, oh, okay, we're going that route. And then when the other shoe drops, I actually really respected that, because it wasn't the lazy writing I thought it was. And that really kind of is another thing that made me sit up and take notice of just all the stuff that is going on in the background, thinking that, okay, if my instincts about that were right, was I also on something about this and this? So I'm sure, like I said, the books are a lot more detailed, but even in the background of the show, there are subtleties that I can truly appreciate, because they do eventually amount to something. And we'll get to that later on as well in some of the later episodes. But I like how it plays with your expectations. I'll say that.
Yeah, you definitely don't when I mean, even because it was a new location and kind of like new circumstances to some degree. Yeah. I did not suspect that Dana was a dark friend until it actually happened. So
I had a feeling she was probably using them to some extent, like she was going to rob them in their sleep or something. I didn't think it would necessarily go the way it did, but something about her felt off. I do have a question though, because you said this is a new location. I don't know if you have the answer to this, but when they get to Green Spring, there's like the dead guy hanging in the cage.
Yeah.
And Matt steals like a crystal from him after Tom cuts him down and wants to bury him. Is there any significance to that, or was it just a shiny trinket?
Just a shiny trinket.
Okay,
I
because they
believe.
focused on it a lot in the cinematography, so I thought maybe there was some importance to it, or it was gonna be magical in and of itself or something. But and it never shows up again in the show, so I was wondering if that was something later on that would come into play or not.
Yeah, to my
Um,
knowledge, I don't think it has any value other than its selling price.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. The other thing that with regards to that guy who was hanging there, I think one character or another, I think it was Tom, mentions that he was an Aiel. Aiel, I'm not
Yes.
sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Aiel. Yep.
Yeah, an ethnic group that has a lot of discrimination against them when they're not in their native lands. And generally, you only see that color hair, which is red, among the Aiel.
Mm,
And
a not so subtle hint.
yeah.
Yep.
So I was kind of like, well, maybe there are exceptions, but between that and the sword that Rand's father had, it started to make me wonder exactly what Rand's real story was.
Mhm.
So, but again, it was just kind of a little one and done line that if you blink, you miss it. But it's it does help to build the plot,
Yeah.
which I respected.
I mean, it could just be Irish too. That's also a possibility.
Yeah, I didn't have anything necessarily specific beyond that, but I do like how they continue to build the world, even if they had to add another town that didn't exist in the books to do it,
Right.
which I didn't know about at the time. So
Yeah.
I really liked the opening scene in this one that went back and showed how Nynaeve escaped from the Trollocs. Because at first she's like, barely conscious being dragged, and then the one Trolloc like checks in on his buddy Trolloc who's hurt, and then decides, he's not going to make it, so he just like shreds him apart for food,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was again very like orc-like from Lord of the Rings type feeling. And if it had ended there, I was like, that was okay, but that scene, like the whole plot point kind of kept going, and then showed her like escaping and getting back to that, like I don't even know what that was supposed to be, like a sacred spring, I guess, back in the hometown. And I really liked that scene, like the lighting in there with the like crystal cave and her hiding in the water, and luckily not being speared while he was spearing in the water.
Yeah, I mean,
I was like, that was lucky, and then just like totally killing the thing and turning the pool red. I thought the whole thing was
that was a thing.
Awesome.
The yin yang symbol that keeps showing up, because its blood forms like half, one half of a yin yang. And I think at the start of this episode or the end of the last one, there's like a pile of animal, or like a bunch of animal corpses arranged.
That was the first episode, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I only took note of it, I think, after the blood did the same thing. So I'm like, okay, there's significance to this. Is there a reason why it looks like a symbol that your average person would be familiar with? I don't know. But
yeah, another kind of cool thing that they slip in, and if you're not actually paying attention, you might miss it. But it definitely has meaning later on.
Yeah, and it also kind of harkened back to something in the first episode, where I don't think we talked about it, but there's a brief shot of somewhere like outside of where the story takes place, where there's these ruins, and for the life of me, the ruins look like skyscrapers. So initially, I had the question: does this take place in our future? And then we get a little bit that does get addressed later on, but then there's then the yin yang symbol, and I'm kind of like, okay, further weight towards that theory, but at this point in watching the show, I wasn't sure, but it was an interesting idea that I thought they might have been playing around with.
Could be. Yeah, I like the scene with the Tinkers as well. The Twathwans, is that how you say that word?
Yep.
They were portrayed. I like the way they introduced them, because like they hear the like crunching in the woods, and then they're like, what? And they like turn and they see people, and then they turn and there's like people right behind them, and like they initially,
it's creepy.
Yeah, they try to make them look like they're scary, and then exactly, like hey, the magic password, and then like they of course have is it Aaron, the younger guy?
Yep.
Yeah.
those were not the same name, so that can't be a yes. But anyway,
Aram is how it's
Aram. Okay, yes. And he's like, all right, mom and pops, listen, here's the.
Whereas I couldn't read my own writing. I wasn't sure if that was an M or an N.
That's fair.
So,
but that's cool. And again, just like a subtle, I guess this is how the books are too, but like subtly brings in like, here's this other group with a completely different philosophy that also exists in this world and kind of travels around the world as well. I will say it's, I guess all fantasy stories have this problem, but like Justin can probably imagine over the course of this whole plot, like these characters are going to go to a lot of different locations. And, you have all these groups like the Tinkers who like seemingly never get out of this bubble over the course of the stuff where, I don't know, like your heroes, of course, are like, here's this cave way over here. We need to look at it.
I mean, there is some intersection between those bubbles. Like the Tinkers do later on run into the White Cloaks, and then there's a thing that happens there. So, I mean, but it is a lot of establishing various story elements and history of the world, and then trying to weave it together in the span of like, 8 hours? It's it's a lot to try and do.
It is. I liked everything in the town they travel to as well. Kind of agree, like we'll see what they do with Tom as they keep going forward, but I thought this was an okay introduction to him. I like that he caught the guy who stole the purse from Matt and then doesn't return the purse to Matt. He's like, this is your fee for listening to the Gleeman. I'll learn a lesson. That's an expensive lesson. The good ones often are, or whatever he says back to him. What did you? So again, I think like the books are written for maybe a slightly younger age than the show is presented as. So when the Dark Friend like makes the overt accusation that Matt and Rand were lovers in the one scene, I was like, wait, what?
That was humorous. Yeah,
that was okay. I don't remember that in the book, but maybe.
I was actually kind of wondering because there's stuff later on where there's hints at relationships between the warders for the Aes Sedai and between the Aes Sedai themselves. I was kind of wondering if that was in the book or if they added that to try and be controversial or topical or something for the show.
It's hinted at, but they don't give it any kind of really substance to it. It's just like a hint that just for example, like green Aes Sedai typically have more than one warder, even 3 or 4 potentially. And they typically are a bit more promiscuous with their warders.
I was just curious because I mean, I was, part of me was wondering, with how much sex is an element of, say, Game of Thrones, if they were trying to ride on that bandwagon.
So far it's been fairly subtle through this first season, with maybe one exception coming up, but I heard another review. I didn't hear it. I was reading another review earlier that said like Game of Thrones boils down to like tits and dragons when you like think back to it.
I love that game.
I was like, I think they should add zombies as well, White Walkers, but yes, essentially that's it. And they're like kind of we're praising this show so far because it seems to be taking like a higher ground with a lot of the same themes and just not blatantly hitting you over the head with those same types of scenes and things like that. So let's see any other notes I had on this one. No, just while Maureen's unconscious and hurt, I think we get a little bit of that good character development again with Lan and Nynaeve here, and you can kind of see there maybe is like some early sparks between the two of them.
Yeah, that's something you really don't get any of in the book. They don't really, you don't see any of this interaction between those two characters.
That's a good point.
It kind of you kind of get hints of it happening, but it certainly is not given to you in a form that you can actually like see.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think a lot of the scenes with them together are actually really, really nice, really well done.
Yeah, I agree. And then you mentioned we see Logain at the end here, who was proclaiming himself to be the Dragon Reborn. And there was, I guess, so we should also mention like even the Aes Sedai themselves are kind of split amongst their is there 7 Ajas,
Seven, yeah.
seven sects as far as what the dragon's role is supposed to be in the future of the world. Whereas Moraine is blue and has kind of been on this quest to find the dragon for a long time. We meet here the Red Sisters, including Leandrin, who is kind of the opposite. And they are like, men should not have the ability to channel regardless of who they are. So even if, the dragon could help us, we still don't like that person.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have like eventually, well, we do see the other colors coming up, I guess, here, but I don't know that we get enough of them in the first season to really like be able to tell them apart.
Yeah, green
No.
we get a good feel for, I think, because they're the ones associated with battle, but
Right.
there's hints that yellow is involved in healing. The other 3,
Okay.
you could offer me $1,000 right now, I wouldn't be able to tell you what they do.
Yeah.
A lot of $1,000 bets going on in this podcast in the last 2 episodes. Wow. You all have way more disposable income than I do, I tell you. Oh, that's not true. I buy a lot of Funko Pops, but anyway. Yeah, so that's good on that
Yeah.
one.
I really Logain is a really interesting character, and
Oh yeah.
I think the acting, the choice they made with the actor, it was a really good one. I think he does a really good job with that.
Yeah.
He's definitely one of those characters that you don't know where exactly he lies. You get a lot of in this episode of, well, I suppose the next episode we'll really learn that, but like his motives and what's driving him.
Yeah.
But in this one, it's very much like, okay, this guy is dangerous, and we need to do something about him.
Yeah. And I don't remember that we've mentioned in this podcast yet, but like supposedly in the mythology of this world too, like the men that can channel the male power is supposedly tainted by like the Dark One's touch, and so either drives you insane or you have kind of these grand ambitions of whatever that are going to eventually make you go kind of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I guess we do get that in that very opening scene of the show, actually, where there's like the 2 guys running.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it here, but yeah, you do see it in the show.
And then you kind of just have the one that's there. So yeah.
All right, well, let's wrap that one up and move on. Episode 4, titled "The Dragon Reborn." And again, as I said, this is one where we actually get to see more of Logain, and what's driving him. And it starts off with Logain waging war in Gildan, and he's coming after the king of Gildan, and then he ends up saying, you might be my enemy, but we can be on the same side. We can work together on this. And so we go on here. Logain, we see him. He's in this cage, but he's still very dangerous. It takes a minimum of 2 of these powerful Aes Sedai just to keep him from escaping, essentially. Also get key things like a parent starts to learn about the way to leave from the Tinkers, which is something that kind of permeates his thought process through the rest of the series. Is violence the way? Is peace the way? We get the story about Tom's nephew Owen, who was gentled by the Aes Sedai, and this is what's driving him to help Rand and Mat and protect them, because he doesn't want that you want to see that happen to them on their travels. And one thing we haven't talked about yet is the dreams that these people are having, involving what they believe is the Dark One. This dark entity is like invading their dreams and causing these nightmares and things. And so Rand gets another dream here, and then we get the aftermath of what happens to this family at this farm, where Rand and Mat and Tom are staying for the night. Then at the end of the episode, Logain's army comes to try and save him, and we get this sequence where Moraine kind of questions Logain, tries to figure out, well, is this guy actually, could he be the dragon or is he not? And in the power struggle here, Logain kills one of the Aes Sedai, Karene. And then a scene that honestly was very, very cool to see, but kind of gave me some pet peeve issues here. With Nynaeve healing this group of people in this huge power surge was a really cool scene, really powerful, but in the books absolutely would not happen because you have to physically touch someone to heal them.
Yeah,
So
I did kind of.
It's not an AoE effect.
I did kind of cry foul with that, and it does actually sort of foreshadow something that happens later on where I cry even more foul at that. But we'll get to that when we get to that episode. But yeah, just it kind of undercut the moment because yeah, one person does die during that, but everyone else, it seems like, all of a sudden, holy crap, there's been this shift in power. All of a sudden, the guy claiming Logain is free. Who knows what he's going to do now? And then just in the span of like a breath, it kind of just all gets undone, and it essentially amounted to nothing except for showing that Nynaeve has a lot of power of her own. But the way it just sort of, the Super Saiyan moment that she had didn't feel ingenuous,
Yeah, I could see what you're thinking from there.
But I mean, it wasn't enough to make me dislike the episode. It was just kind of a head tilty sort of moment. Like, really, this is okay. I'll roll with it.
Yeah. I think maybe I don't think this is a plot spoiler, but I think in the books maybe too the Aes Sedai are kind of, I don't want to say reliant, but I think they are used to being able to heal each other considerably with their powers. And so when you get to the moments in the books where like it's a big enough oh shit moment where like the Aes Sedai can't put out the fires quick enough to try to heal people and save people, then like like things have seriously gone wrong and they're outmatched with whatever the situation is. So
okay.
But as a viewer who doesn't know that, I could see what you're saying here. It's just like wax on, wax off.
Kind of, yeah. Like, okay, what are there ever going to be any stakes that are permanent? Is kind of the thought that kind of went through my head here, and I've got a note about that. And the answer ends up being yes, but it at the time it kind of rattled me a little. Like, okay, how much should I really be worried that any of these people are in any real danger in light of what just happened?
Tell it to the ferryman. Tell it to the ferryman. They could have used air to pull him back over, but no. It's too late. This is an episode I did not get a chance to rewatch, so I have limited thoughts on this one. Probably, I do recall the Tinkers being kind of cool, and the interactions with Egwene and Perrin. I really like that, and then a lot of the stuff with Logain. I just think. Brett said the cast job was really well here. He just kind of looks like this maniacal guy who could be all sorts of danger. And then we see basically the end of this one is where they make the somewhat controversial decision to gentle him and cut him off from the one power, which will have some ramifications in a few episodes here. But supposedly they were not supposed to do that, at least in the method that they used. I guess the setting that they used is not necessarily how that was supposed to play out by like Aes Sedai law, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah,
because they were supposed to bring him back for judgment at the tower, I think is how it was supposed to go, right?
Yep, exactly.
That sounds right. Yeah. And then again, because I apologize, it's been a bit since I've seen this particular episode, but when Tom kind of like sacrifices himself with the fade so Rand and Matt can escape, do we see Tom again after this, or is that like
not in this season? No.
Yeah, that's the last time that he shows up.
Okay. And that's pretty true to the book too. Like he's gone, and then you're like, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back?
Then he comes back as Tom Marilyn the White.
Instead of playing the lute, he plays the guitar. That's good stuff.
Which they actually could do, because in the books he is described as having like large white mustache and beard.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that he like plays with. Yeah.
So he really could come back
He
with a
could
big
come
old
back.
white mustache. And, yeah, that'd be amazing.
Fly, you fools.
That'd be hilarious. Oh my gosh.
All right, so here we are at the end of we're through the fourth episode, and looks like we're gonna have to cut this into two episodes of the podcast. So we are going to send you off here, and we will be back with the final 4 episodes of the series and our final thoughts in another future episode.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Night.
See ya.